So Dan Schneider and Nickelodeon have been totally exposed, and we need to talk about it. Hey guys, Mike here, welcome back to my channel. Before we get into this video, can you please hit that subscribe button, thumbs up the video, comment any of your own thoughts. I'm growing and I'd love for you to support me and get around some of my other videos. This is a pop culture channel talking all things pop culture, so I'd love for you to subscribe for more pop culture content. Okay, so today I finished watching the Quiet on Set, The Dark Side of Kids television docu-series, and this has got to be one of the most devastating kind of revelations in the world of children's entertainment that I've seen in my entire life. And if you're unfamiliar with this entire story, it basically is about those live action kids shows on Nickelodeon back in the day. We're talking shows like Drake and Josh, The Amanda Show, iCarly, all those kinds of kids comedy sitcoms that used to air on Nickelodeon back in the 90s and 2000s. And this documentary looks at some really, really terrible people doing terrible things to children who were actors in these shows. And the focal point of the series is this guy called Dan Schneider. It really just exposes him as this sort of domineering tyrant, bully kind of figure on the set of a lot of these Nickelodeon shows, and someone who was also responsible for some pretty questionable and inappropriate behavior around child actors. And it also looks at this other guy, Peck, who was actually convicted of several felonies against a minor who was a Nickelodeon star, who this documentary reveals for the first time was Drake Bell of Drake and Josh. There are so many heart-wrenching things to see here, and I'm gonna be honest, I've been following this sort of for a really long time. The weirdest part about this is that I remember seeing these rumors about Dan Schneider being a bit of a creep and a bit of a bully all over the internet on like websites like 4chan that I used to go on when I was at high school. That's over 10 years ago now. I reckon I first saw rumors about this stuff on the internet literally in like 2008 or 9. And I originally thought they weren't true, but as time went on, it became more and more apparent that there was definitely something legitimate in what was being spread online about this person. Now, a lot of accusations against Dan Schneider in particular are about his genuine bullying and talking down to particularly female staff on the show, but also just his presence being one of fear, him being a control freak who would yell at staff, yell at actors, and just sort of like treat people really poorly on sets. And there are a few child stars who are subject in this documentary and are really examined in a lot of detail. The first one definitely being Amanda Bynes. Now, I remember being a kid and Amanda Bynes being one of the biggest actors in the world. The biggest child actors, that is. She was really famous and really popular, okay? The Amanda Show was huge and everybody loved it. She was also in a movie called Big Fat Liar, which Dan Schneider actually wrote, and that was one of my favorite movies of all time as a kid. It had Paul Giamatti and Frankie Muniz. It's a great movie as a side note. You should watch it. Amanda Bynes was massive, and then suddenly she just kind of disappeared from the spotlight entirely. And as the 2000s went on, there were more and more instances of her showing really extreme mental instability, which is really sad, and just lots of legal issues and things coming up, right? That almost typical child star thing. And maybe it wasn't surprising, but a lot of people began linking it to these Dan Schneider rumors that he did something to her. And I still kind of believe that's true, and they touch on it in this documentary. Amanda Bynes has not commented on this at all, but she must be aware that it's being talked about, and I'm really curious to see if she will come out. I don't even know where she is in the world at the moment because she's so far removed from the spotlight now that it's actually quite sad. The main focus, as I said, is Drake Bell. He, of course, for the first time reveals his identity as the minor who was abused by Peck, the producer and writer on some of the Nickelodeon shows he worked on. And some of the abuse detailed is really, really severe, and it's absolutely devastating for Drake, as well as his father, who seemed to be aware that there was something weird about this Peck guy, who, by the way, is not related in any way to Josh Peck, Drake's co-star in Drake and Josh. That's just a coincidence. But Drake's father talks a lot about how he knew something was happening, but Brian Peck kept sort of dividing them and making Drake hate his father to get closer to him. It is just some really devastating content, and seeing Drake Bell detail his experience so vividly, and also explaining how there were 50 people in the courtroom supporting this Peck guy who wrote letters to the judge in support of him as well, and how betrayed he felt and how sad he felt about that entire experience is just mind-blowingly crazy. And it is amazing to see these photos of Drake Bell as a teenager smiling for cameras and knowing everything that had happened to him, but knowing that he had to be like a role model and someone that kids could look up to. And all of this trauma that he endured led to him having quite a few public breakdowns and instances with the law in his own sort of life and his own adulthood, similar to the Amanda Bynes thing. And it's clear at this point that something about child stardom is not right. The worst part is that after Brian Peck got out of jail, right, served his sentence for abusing a child, he was then hired on a Disney Channel show, The Sweet Life with Zack and Cody, or it might have been The Sweet Life on Deck, to be a writer on that show, and he was quickly fired when they learned about his convictions. But it is incredible that something like that could possibly happen in the first place. They also touch a little bit on Jennette McCurdy, and I think Jennette McCurdy's story is one of the most interesting of all. If you haven't read her book, I'm Glad My Mum Died, which came out a couple of years ago, it's one of the most incredible books ever that actually touches a little bit on the Dan Schneider stuff and him being abusive. Jennette McCurdy played Sam in iCarly, one of the main characters, and in the spin-off Sam and Cat, which also featured Ariana Grande. She had a horrific experience on all of these shows and basically regrets her time as a child star. She doesn't appear on camera in the documentary. She's said a lot about this publicly though, and she also refused to appear in the iCarly reboot series, which came out a few years ago and went for 3 seasons before being cancelled. Sam is noticeably absent from the show, even though the other main actors such as Miranda Cosgrove, Jerry Traynor, and Nathan Kress are all present. And I knew when she refused to be in that show that something was about to come to light that had been bubbling away for a very, very long time. I think one of the main things that a lot of people have seen a pattern in Dan Schneider's work is like this weird obsession with sexualizing young female actresses. There are compilations on YouTube of weird, creepy scenes that a lot of these minors had to film while in these TV shows that I guess could be passed off as just like childish fun, but definitely have these weird innuendos to them and strange sort of adult undertones that are not really appropriate for children. I'm not going to play any of them here, but seriously, look it up on YouTube and you will very quickly see some of these scenes, many of which feature Ariana Grande, who also doesn't appear in interview on this program either. Now, amazingly, after this documentary series aired, Dan Schneider has actually done his own sit-down interview with The Hollywood Reporter with a guy called Boogie, who apparently played Tebow on iCarly. Not gonna lie, I don't even know if half the things I just said make any sense. And in this 19-minute video, Dan Schneider staunchly defends himself against the allegations, acknowledges that he could have done a lot better in a lot of instances, but he really does defend himself. And this guy, Boogie, who worked with him in the past, also says he had a really positive experience with Dan.
The last thing I want to ever do is put any content in a show that's going to upset my audience and make them want to turn off the TV. Why would I ever want to do that?
And while I'm not trying to take sides here, it does feel like for something like this to happen, there has to be a huge storm brewing for a long time. And while it's good that Dan Schneider has come out and said, hey, like, I accept some of these allegations, but you know, I could have done a better job. It still just feels really strange that he has instantly come out to defend himself. And I guess that is the point of that video, is to make people like me then doubt myself in what I saw in the documentary. And I do agree that everyone has the chance to tell their story and everyone should have their own, you know, opportunity to clear the air and give their own perspective. And it is such a strange and grueling situation. I think in all of this, the people I feel worse for, of course, are the child actors who are often brought into these industries by their parents who don't know any better or who are living vicariously through their children in some instances. Sometimes I don't think they even want to do a lot of the things that they are supposed to do. Drake Bell, of course, is the biggest victim in all of this, and it's so easy to see how what happened to him as a child led to him making some of the mistakes that he made in adulthood. I think it's really brave of him to speak so candidly about what happened to him in this, and it's devastating, especially as someone who was a big fan of a lot of these shows. Even when I read Jennette McCurdy's book, it also really devastated me because I used to love the show that she was on when I was a kid. Interestingly, it broke straight after this documentary series finished airing that actors Nathan Kress and Jerry Traynor, who played Freddie and Spencer respectively in iCarly, unfollowed Nickelodeon and the iCarly Instagram accounts, which I did find really interesting. Both of them must have been aware of a lot of this stuff prior to doing that iCarly reboot, especially because Jennette McCurdy was really vocal about not wanting to be in it. There is no way they weren't aware of a lot of these issues, so it's weird that they would withdraw their support for those brands now. But I do acknowledge that this would be a really difficult and challenging thing to deal with as someone who was part of Nickelodeon but probably had nothing to do with any of these issues more broadly. This is genuinely one of the most awful stories ever, and I'm glad in a way that it has come to light in this documentary series, but I'm devastated for the victims, and I think something genuinely needs to be done about child stars and making sure they're well and looked after. I mean, actress Alison Stoner has a whole podcast where she talks about her experience as a child actor. It was negative, by the way, and you might know her from things like Cheaper by the Dozen and Camp Rock, where she had really prominent roles. It's all really sad. Overall, I just hope that these victims are getting help and that all of this stuff at Nickelodeon or anywhere that involves child actors is really cleaned up and really looked at, you know, in terms of not prioritizing money, but prioritizing the welfare of children. Those are my thoughts. Hey, thanks for watching this video. Obviously that was a bit of a deeper one and a little bit more intense, but thanks for sticking with it. If you like my content, I do pop culture deep dives like this all the time over on my channel. Make sure you subscribe. I also do a podcast that you can listen to on this channel or wherever you podcast. It's called 20th Century Boy. As well as that, you can support me on Patreon, patreon.com/RadioMike. Be one of the 60+ people who are already supporting my content. I also am on TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, pretty much every platform there. Just Google Radio Mike. I'd love your support in any way possible, so share this video around, thumbs up, all the stuff that you're supposed to do. I don't know, there's so much stuff you're supposed to do. You know what to do. If you like me, follow me. That's all I'll say. Hey, thanks so much, guys. I'll see you in another video. Bye.